Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Hi, Jerry.
My name is David.
I'm Clint.
Yeah. Yeah. George.
I'm Brad.
Somebody?
Lucretia.
Peter.
Gary. I'm Hal.
I'm Jim.
I'm Joe. Richard.
Yes, we covered everybody. So it's my pleasure to introduce Wade. Is it Meyer or Meyer? Meyer. He's the director of programs at the Rainbow Communities Center, which is the serves the LGBT community in Contra Costa County. He's got a background in women's studies and international studies, and has a Master's of Divinity and a certificate in sexuality and religion from the Pacific School of Religion. His partner, Corey, who's also here, Corey Miyamura, is the director of Endurance, great name, a sports and psychology center, which uses mindfulness practices in his work with clients and athletes. So, welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thanks for being so welcoming. This is a great space. This is our first time here, so thanks for that. And I also want to say thank you to Carol Newhouse, who kind of made this happen. And she's been telling me about you actually for a long time, about how great you all are and how she loves to come here. I work with her at the Rainbow Community Center, so I'm excited to sort of have that, share that connection with you all as well. So I'm here to talk about reading sacred text from a queer perspective. So I want to tell you a little bit about what I mean by that, and also acknowledge that I don't have a lot of exposure to Buddhism. So in my training at Pacific School of Religion, I've had some exposure and some study of Buddhism, but I'm hoping that you all will be able to have a little bit of a dialogue with me. So please forgive me if I make some wrong assumptions, and feel free to correct me or anything like that. So I come from a Christian background, from an Anabaptist tradition in Kansas, which is a pretty conservative kind of tradition. And I went to Pacific School of Religion and studied mostly Christianity, but also some intersections with other traditions. And then I work, identify as queer. I work with LGBT people. And I really love it when all of those things come together and we can, in spaces like this, where we can explore what it means to be spiritual people, what it means to have religious and spiritual perspectives as LGBT queer people. And when I talk about holy texts, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, these are traditions that really have text and writing, books at the center of their traditions. And so those of us who grew up in the U.S. or have exposure in the U.S. have some exposure to Christianity and text-based traditions. And even those of us who maybe didn't grow up in the U.S. or who don't have as much background in those traditions, we're steeped in American society is really has a lot of emphasis on text-based kinds of traditions. Whereas my understanding of Buddhism is that there are texts, but it's maybe not sort of central. There's not like a Bible, for example. So I want to define a little bit what I mean by sacred texts and what I mean by queer perspectives or reading as a queer person. So the way I understand sacred text is they are writings usually, books usually, that have some kind of wisdom that we've agreed upon as a society or as in particular traditions that have spiritual merit or have spiritual value that can tell us something about what it means to live in the world, what it means to answer some of those questions that aren't answerable purely in kind of physical sciences. Usually they are passed down over time, so many of them started as oral traditions and then were written down and then get disseminated in that way. And that they're passed down because they resonated with people, not just one person, but a group of people, and that collectively a group of people said, these have spiritual merit and I want to preserve them and pass them down. But I also want us to think outside the box. So we know, the Bible, for example, is something that is given to us as a sacred text. But we also know that some things we come across every day, maybe certain authors or poetry, speaks to us and resonates with us. And so I want us to also think about those kinds of things as texts that may be sacred. They speak to us about spiritual wisdom or something of that nature. And then there's also, academics may say that texts aren't always written, they aren't always in books, so they may be something bigger, so they may be life experiences, they may be pictures, they may be other things. And so I don't want us to get stuck only on thinking about books, but I want to speak about some ways to look at all of our experiences as queer people and sort of reading them in some sense. And then what do I mean by queer? So I don't know, have any of you been exposed to queer theory and sort of the academic kind of part of that? You nod. Okay, so I'm talking a little bit more in that kind of area. So what I mean by queer when I'm talking today is starting from the knowledge that we gain as LGBT, as queer people. So starting with what our experiences are and looking at the world with that lens. And to me, that means permission to think differently. It means knowing that as LGBT people, we are not kind of the dominant part of society, so we may have a different perspective because we have an angle that is slightly different from kind of the majority of society. To me, it also means permission to bring our bodies and our sexualities to the table when we're talking, or when we're looking at things as queer people. So I was thinking earlier this morning, my body has a way of inserting itself anytime there's a quiet moment, like meditation, like at Quaker meetings, my stomach will start to grumble or something like that, and it's, my body insists on me knowing that it's there, and that I need to pay attention and bring it with me when I'm in any kind of spiritual space or sort of any space in general. And lastly, I think a queer perspective means permission to bring multiplicity to the table. So, LGBT itself, all of those letters have slightly different life experiences. And then those of us from different ages, from different parts of the country, we call ourselves a community, but there are actually many different kinds of folks that fit into that community. So it's permission to say, this is my perspective, but I also know that someone else in my community has a different perspective, and we can carry or hold all of the different perspectives. And then sort of the other piece that to me is really important when we talk about queer spirituality comes from one of my professors, Mary Tolbert, at Pacific School of Religion, who talks about what is authority? Why do we grant certain things authority? Why do we say that the Bible has an authority to tell us something about spirituality? And then how do we treat something that we consider to be sacred, to have that sacred authority? And so what she says is that often we set aside sacred texts and look at them differently, and she questions sort of why we do that or how we do that. So one thought is these are texts that were written a long time ago, often. Do we think of them as historical, being sort of in that time period, or do we think of them as transcendent, meaning that they are what they say is always true across time? She also thinks about the worldview at the time they were written versus our time today. So do we need to know about the worldview then, or do we only look at how it reflects in our life today? And similarly, what is the context of something being written or something, a story being identified as valuable? And so in the Hebrew scriptures, for example, there's a lot of death and destruction and war and genocide and all of these things. And so for Christian people or Jewish people, why do we consider that to be sacred? And so what was the context that people thought that was valuable, and do we find that valuable today? And then the last thing that she points out, so in many text-based traditions, they're monotheistic. There's like this idea of a single God, and sort of what goes along with that is that there's a single truth and there's one correct way of looking at it. And what I said around, looking at things as queer people, we get to bring multiplicity to that. And so do we think that there is only one correct or right way to look at something or to read or to understand something, or can we hold different perspectives? Any thoughts or questions about all of that definition? Yeah.
I mean, I thought the whole thing about sacred text is it's given to you as revelation. It's scripture, it's text, thought to be written by God, right? That's always the definition I've had of that. But that's not what you said.
That's correct. Yeah. So, and I think that that's part of what we need to kind of piece out around what is sacred and what isn't sacred. So, my understanding that there are lots of stories in Buddhism about what the Buddha did and what the Buddha said and all of these things. And so, do we consider those sacred just because they're given to us, just because the Buddha's name is mentioned in it, or because, this idea that God has given us these scriptures, or do we think of them as sacred because they resonate with us? And so I want us to think about that. The source where they came from, so if they were written by God or written by men, I think is important to pay attention to. And I think there's room for both of those perspectives. So if it resonates with us, does that mean that it's written by God, or does that mean that it was, shown to someone by angels and revealed to them as they were writing it? Does that...
Well, I'm just saying that, for example, the Quran is given to the Prophet as the direct message from Allah, right? And the Bible is thought of as the direct gift from God. And the Book of Mormon is given to Joseph Smith by God. That's different from something that's just been around for a long time and that kind of resonates with us. Those are, in my mind, those are two different things.
Yeah, I think they could be. But I also think, I think it's important to pay attention to whether or not we believe that is sort of, the voice of God speaking to us. Well, I think the voice of God speaking to us, to me, is the valuable part of that. So whether it was given to someone as kind of as a whole text, or whether it was kind of compiled over time. Because I think, and that's the historical versus transcendent kind of idea. Was it compiled over time? Was it given as a whole piece and passed down? And I think it's important to pay attention to kind of historically how those things came about, because we also tell stories about them, and that may or may not resonate. So for some of us, the idea that God revealed to Moses this particular set of principles, to me is less important than whether or not those principles resonate with us and get passed down. So if they resonate with us and we believe that God gave them to him, then I think that's what makes them sacred. But if someone told me that, they wrote something in a diary that God spoke to them last night, I would need to know, I need to know a little more about whether or not that would resonate to me and whether or not I would believe that, or whether or not I would consider that to be something of God speaking to me or just God speaking to that person. Yeah?
For me, I think what sets Buddhism aside from the other religions is that God doesn't have a role to play. In the text encompass Buddhism. They are sutras that are recordings of teachings the Buddha gave, but the Buddha's whole experience was one of awakening to the true nature of existence. And to him, whether there was a God or not was not relevant to that awakening. So that's a primary difference when I consider scriptures or sutras. That what the Buddha is saying is it's up to you to find out if this is true. I'm not saying this is true. This was my experience. And you now have an opportunity to follow your own path to this awakening, which is a realization of what causes suffering in human existence. So there's a difference, in my view, compared to those other sacred texts.
So they're not. Oh, go ahead.
But again, there's still relevance for a queer aspect of view of those teachings.
You had to.
Well, a bunch of things. One, there's a tradition in Judaism in which one looks at the text, but there's this constant interpretation and constant revisioning, and then as history goes on, things change, and whole sects and groups of people decide to interpret things completely differently. So, and somehow there's a tradition in Buddhism which he referred to that these are truths that the Buddha discovered, but that you are to try them for yourself and to see if they work. And that's always been something that I enjoy a lot. So I'm also struck with, when we say religion, there's so many yet there are extremist Buddhists in Burma right now who are killing Muslims, and I'm sure they don't follow that strict you just have to find out for yourself. So when we talk about a religion and spirituality, it covers something from fundamental of God gave us this and there's no questioning it, to find out for yourself. There's lots of different ways, even within one tradition, and certainly in many traditions. So I think queer people, as a queer man, when I've explored religions, I've always come to it from the more like take what you want and see what works for you and see what works, particularly as a queer man, and then.
Yeah, and I think just to that point, I think for those of us who are queer and who come from grow up in a society where we are not the majority, I think it's important for us to be able to grapple with that. So we're told, here's the set of beliefs that is right and correct, or here's the set of beliefs that the way of being that is the right way to be. And at least for those of us who are not straight, we already know that there's something wrong with that set of beliefs, and so we have to be able to come as queer people, come from a different angle and arrive at our own understanding of what is true and what resonates. Yeah.
I've been grappling with this for quite some time with my family who's Mormon, and I had a very interesting discussion with my nephew on Facebook this week, and he asked, because I had sort of withdrawn from my family for many years, and he questioned me, because he doesn't really know me. He said, "Are you a Mormon? Are you a Christian?" I was like, wow. And I said, you know what? I'm not a Mormon and I'm not a Christian, but I am part of the Mormon community. And when you say queer, I say, gee, am I queer? I mean, what the hell does that mean? I don't know if I'm queer, but I'm part of the queer community. I don't even know if I'm Buddhist, and I'm part of the Buddhist community. And, it's like, because I want to say yes, I don't want to say no, and I don't want to sit here and analyze what is Buddhism, and, because it's a big, it's like, I would rather just say yes, not no, because I want to be included, and I want to be able to participate. And even you said, you don't know if you're an expert on Buddhism. Well, guess what? You're part of the Buddhist community, whether you like it or not.
And that's, I think, a really valuable insight for LGBT or queer people. Like, is there a set of things that you have to do? Like, do you have to look a certain way? Do you have to have sex a certain number of times? Do you have to have sex at all? What makes you a part of the community aside from feeling like you're a part of the community? I think that's a really important thing.
You get to just say you're part of the community. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
I've gotten to a lot of discussions on the internet with Christians justifying their homophobia, and the traditional queer responsibility experience is trying to put a queer slant on it, like, Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't homophobic, it was like anti hospitality, therefore that's why they had destroyed it, because it violated the whole guest thing. Or Paul was only talking about sacred prostitutes, blah, blah, blah. And the thing is, it seems kind of like you can't just say, well, this is false because it doesn't make any sense. I mean, who gives a fuck about Sodom and Gomorrah? I mean, it's like, why do I have to think that queer is bad because of this little 4,000-year-old fairy tale? Again, it's exactly what Hal said. It's like, it seems like for the monotheism religions, it isn't about whether it makes sense or whether you've experienced yourself. It's all about either you believe this because it's there, and if it defies logic, then you go with faith. And I think that's the big, huge flaw with monotheism. I have huge issues with the whole monotheistic way of approaching spirituality.
And that was a great segue into one little section I wanted to bring up to you. So I had another professor named Tim Cook who talks exactly about that approach. So people hear from Christianity, well, LGBT people are sinful. And so how do people respond to that? So one thing that people often do is, he calls it a pissing contest. So I can interpret the Bible better than you. And so if you really look, it's about hospitality. But essentially, it's a pissing contest, and it doesn't really get to the fundamental point of why someone would believe or not believe it. It's it's just like, well, I can do it better than you. And then, of course, someone else can say, well, if you dig in and look at the original Hebrew word, it says this. And so you get into this battle that isn't really fruitful in the end. And what he gave an example of a different way of approaching that comes from cruising. Which I love this approach, and I think for many, I don't have a lot of experience with cruising, but my dad is gay and he has lots of stories about all kinds of different places where he's met men. But anyway, so this Professor Tim Cook's approach is basically, when you're cruising, you're out there, you have an openness to having an experience. You may be searching for a certain kind of experience. And you see something that may be intriguing. Maybe you catch somebody's eye, or you see someone that you find attractive, and so you follow that a little bit. And sometimes, you keep following it, and it results in this really pleasurable, transcendent experience. Sometimes you follow it, and then you find out, maybe that's not going to work, and you kind of move on. Sometimes you follow up, and the experience is sort of not that great, or it doesn't really work out for you, and then you go to bed or you try again or whatever. And so his suggestion, just as an example of reading a sacred text as a queer person, is to take the same approach. So you're reading something, or you're hearing a sermon, and something seems a little bit intriguing. Maybe something about the Sodom and Gomorrah story is intriguing to you, and you want to know, what's more about these two handsome strangers that showed up in this town. And so you follow that, and then you're like, this weird thing happened, somebody turned into a pillar of salt. That's not very interesting, and so you move on, and you maintain an openness to what intrigues you and what draws you in. Does that resonate with you in terms of cruising and sort of how to think about that? I think it's a really wonderful way to approach it, and it also kind of takes the weight out of it, so you don't have to treat it like this special sacred thing that you have to handle very carefully. You can treat it like you would treat something in your regular life. So, does it intrigue me? Does it resonate inside of me? Does it connect with the experience I had? And you can go from that perspective. And so his suggestion is, don't get into pissing contests, but also don't let someone else tell you what should resonate with you and what should be important to you. But know what is important to you and what does connect with you. And then and let some of the other stuff that doesn't connect, let somebody else connect with that. And I do think Buddhism, at least from my understanding, has a lot of kind of tools and practices already that help you do that. So, the whole concept of mindfulness is about maintaining that openness, maintaining the awareness of what strikes you or what resonates inside of you. And then the awareness of how you respond and just being mindful of what's going on inside yourself as you're having, the experience of reading a sacred text or participating in a ritual. And then the other valuable thing, I think, is a little bit of what Hal pointed out. There's not this idea that there's a right and moral correct way to do things, but that my understanding is that it's more about skilled and unskilled. And so you get to see if something works for you, you get to practice. It's not like you arrive at a single point and then you're done. My understanding is that it's much more of a journey. Are there other things around Buddhism that kind of resonate with that cruising idea?
Well, you were the word sacred is an interesting thing to explore because what is for an atheist or agnostic, whatever I am, I'm done with, and I've noticed that there are things, the cruising analogy is great because there are things that have attracted me. There are concepts and practices that have attracted me over the years. And those have shifted over time significantly as I've gained more experience in life. So sacred, as far as I'm concerned, maybe, I don't know if that's the right word to use for me, but things that I value greatly or people or events that I consider important.
Is there another word you might use? Or
I guess it's in my mind I've always associated sacred with monotheistic revelation, like Joe was talking about it earlier. And, in that sense, it's like, there is the Heart Sutra, the Diamond Sutra, there's sacred, in quotes, in Buddhism, that they do not refer to a God as far as I can give my take on it.
So maybe one way to approach it, or maybe the difference that we're sort of dancing around, is whether one believes that a sacred text has authority. Like it's the Word of God, it's unerring, it's not to be questioned. And what you just described earlier, the cruising example, you can't treat it like a cafeteria. You can't just take this and leave that, and this resonates with me and this doesn't. So I think maybe that's the difference between the fundamentalist view and the more reasoned view of saying, and the Buddhistic view of try it for yourself, see what works. And there's no room for that in a fundamentalist, which we tend to associate with, a monotheistic approach. I mean, they're not the same, but generally we tend to make that assumption, like if it's monotheistic, it's fundamentalist, and it is, they speak with authority. So.
I think that's sort of the dominant. If there is one God, then there must be one answer, and that somehow if you can call God and say, is this the right answer? And God will say yes or no. But I would also say that, there is room within monotheism to not be fundamentalist. And I think that the fundamentalist tendency, I think, is related to monotheism, but, not exclusively, as you were pointing out.
And there's Hindu fundamentalists, they're not monotheistic, there's Buddhist fundamentalists. So I think it's important to know that it's part of what humans do when they create, religious systems. They can go to fundamentalism.
Yeah, and I think before I get to your point, I think also wondering why does something have authority? So why do we grant it authority? Is it because it resonates? There's some wisdom or there's some experience that speaks to you, or is it because someone outside of you told you that you have to treat it that way? Because I think you can treat it as a cafeteria if you don't have that fundamentalist idea.
Right, because I think a sacred text, there are many sacred texts that come from Walt Whitman or Mary Oliver. But I don't necessarily say wow, I'm going to live my life that way without question.
That's an important thing, yeah.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about dualism and non-dualism as well, and splitting experience into sacred and profane, which I grew up Catholic, so there certainly was a lot of that, and clearly the LGBT experience would be in the profane realm as far as my tradition that I grew up in was concerned. So I know one thing I struggle with is being discerning and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because there is wisdom in these traditions, but we've been so hurt by those traditions as well. So I'm more comfortable thinking of everything as sacred, including the horrific stuff is, and at some level, if you explore it deeply enough, it's an expression of oneness, and that everything is one. So it's sort of paradoxical that the monotheism is dualistic and kind of splits experience.
What you're saying.
Well, I think one of the things that's getting obscured by this discussion of texts is the communities that follow these texts, and the fact that as humans, community is a part of who we are, and we can be identified as queer, but if you're going to identify in these communities, you either stay in the closet with your own interpretation of the texts, as you would a queer person in Catholicism traditionally, and it just forces you into this untruthful representation. I mean, I found myself searching a lifetime for, growing up 12 years of Catholic education through Jesuit college, and then finally realizing no, and searching, coming from the East, even searching to the leftist churches, Quakers, and there's nothing to oppose in Quakerism. I was very pleased with the social context and the community, but when I asked to be a member, I had to believe in Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. And this is in San Francisco, as liberal as they get, and I said, well, I've been coming for a year, but Jesus Christ isn't my personal Savior, so I had to walk away from that. Now, the next thing I think about Buddhism is that Buddha was just incredibly intuitive into how the mind works. And all he described was how the mind works, and how to be at peace, and how to find happiness and joy, and just the mechanics of that. And I think that's why when everyone in religion is searching for truth, but they define it by their sacred texts, that now that we have in neuropsychology and neurophysiology, we have the tools to measure some of these things, that it's the meditators and the Buddhist monks that we're actually studying. That when you look at the power of prayer, it never holds up in studies. And maybe at Oral Roberts University, but everybody's else. And so when they really try to study this, some of it is the fact that even whether it's Catholicism or whatever, people don't practice it in any standardized way that they can probably put two people in a functional MRI and come out with the same results if they were, reading the Bible or something. But in meditation, at least they can standardize it to some way. But I think it's just fascinating. It's really more about how does the mind work as humans, and then can we find community around that truth? That's whatever our individual experience of that is. And then the fact that we actually build a community around that fascinates me about Buddhism, and that we aren't all hermit monks on a mountain, and that there is some value in us being together, and I find this community is unique in its own way, that it's in its own traditions that have evolved in the last 30 years or so. So I think this is the experiment for the future, is to watch communities like this evolve, and with or without sacred texts, and just the existential and experiential part of it.
Do you think there is a sort of a queer or a gay sort of specific angle?
I think it's natural to want that to be, but I'm not one to put the tranny in transcendence. Okay? I think, it's experiential.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to think about, this community, if it develops, in 2,000 years, will there be a gay Buddhist fellowship where you have to believe that, this or that thing is correct, or will it continue to be, something where you can come and practice and identify regardless of what your belief system is? We might guess.
I'm very secular, and but I find value in being with these people, and I think that this community is clearly suffered and has scars from the epidemic, and defines itself as gay rather than queer, and I don't think they're hostile to women coming, but I think it's just the fact that the scars of the epidemic run so deep, and what brought people together so much was about it being a gay life and death experience, and that's why some of the welcoming traditions here, as opposed to so many sanghas where you just come, meditate, listen, leave, and there's not even an exchange of names or a sense of trying to build a community in a sangha.
Yeah, there are two aphorisms in Buddhism that I've heard that really resonate to me. It's like one is, the finger pointing to the moon is not the moon, and if you see Buddha on the path, kill him. And that's kind of shocking, but the idea behind those aphorisms is that Buddhism is just a construct that we're using just to try to make some sense out of the ineffable, and don't take it too seriously. It's just like I guess it's just a construct that we're trying to make some sense out of. The Dalai Lama himself says, follow whatever path looks best for you, as opposed to this monotheistic approach. We are the chosen people, we are the one true path. If you don't believe in us, there's this hell, it's going to burn for all eternity. There's just like this basic insecurity about how you have to hold on to all this stuff, or else, everything, or else we'll lose everything. You have to believe everything, or you can't believe anything. And I just see it as some of the reason for the hatefulness I see in monotheism is like there's a real digging in their heels, and a real sense of desperation. Like we can't allow any deviation, because if we do, the whole system comes falling down. And I think there's a huge distinction between that and Buddhism.
Probably why this group works. How long has Gay Buddhist Fellowship been around?
I think it's been since the late 80s.
Late 80s, which is a long time for a group to. First of all, I would change our name. We would be called probably the Gay Fellowship Buddhists, because gay is the most important thing. Fellowship is next, and then Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And also, we don't have a teacher. We don't ascribe to being Tibetan or Vipassana or anything else. We do bring in all these people so we get a better view. And I was just thinking that's why our community, this works so much, and it works well for our gay community, because we don't have a set, and bring someone like you and just talk about anything else. So we're kind of just really open-ended and talk about a lot of things. I think if we had a teacher or something, probably people wouldn't like the teacher maybe, or if we said we're going to become Tibetans tomorrow, people wouldn't like that, but we keep it really fluid and open-ended.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, multiplicity, the non-duality kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And is it Joe?
I was just going to piggyback on what Clint said about, from my perspective, the problem with fundamentalists, I don't care what they believe. It's when they want to take their belief and impose it on me. That is the issue. I don't care what you do. Just leave me alone. But they don't.
So, I wanted to get your take on queer people as heretics. Queers are scapegoated by the Christians, some Christian groups today. But going back through history, Hitler scapegoated queer people. And I was wondering what your take was on going back through history, how queers are seen as either heretics or traitors or something like that.
Well, I think what Joe was saying about how it's not just about I believe this thing, but that especially in a kind of a fundamentalist or a political sort of oriented spiritual tradition, and it's always about, and I believe this, and you also have to believe that, or you're a heretic, or you're, you're outside of our community, or you have to believe this thing, or, you're shunned. And I think that's one of the, it's a gift, even though it's a sort of a curse as well. Like, we know, that the traditional way of organizing family is a man and a woman have children, kind of, and certainly that has changed over time. But in the last, when Western society sort of really consolidated, that was the model of organizing communities. You had your family, it was heterosexual, there were children. But as gay people or queer people, we already knew from that point that there was something wrong with that, and so that we didn't fit in with that, and so that. Because of the communities that were in power at the time, that was wrong. You were heretical. We needed to get rid of you. Through the Inquisition, through Hitler, all of those kinds of things, through the the witches and that were in the 1600s in the U.S., that kind of thing. I guess it wasn't the U.S. at the time. But I think that's also the sort of the gift and the curse, is that we can come from it from a different angle. We can say, yes, you think I need to believe this whole set of beliefs, but I don't. And I don't agree with the foundation that you have about why I need to believe that. So if you say, God gave me this text and God told me that these are the things you have to believe, we can say, we already have in our own lives and our own experiences and our own desires, we've already had to question some of that and found that it wasn't exactly as it was told to us. And so we can say, I don't agree with that is what, God has given to us as the way that we have to be. And that I hope that as queer people, and especially communities and fellowships, where you can gather together and work through a different perspective about what has authority for you that isn't about God giving you this, giving us this particular set of beliefs. And, the unfortunate truth is that sometimes we'll get punished for that. Sometimes we get shunned. Hopefully in today's society, we aren't going to be put in concentration camps or murdered, but sometimes we are murdered and sometimes we are beaten up, and we do suffer for that. But I also hope that we can find a ground to stand on, as gay people, as LGBT people, as queer people, to say, this is what's true for me, and this is what spirituality is for me, and this is what resonates with me, and that we can find something to return to give us strength when we have to deal with some of those kinds of things. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but I think that's the value. And that's what Carol also was telling me about the value of the Lesbian Buddhist Sangha or the Gay Buddhist Fellowship, is that we're, intentionally creating communities to work out how do we find a spiritual practice, how do we find a spiritual grounding that doesn't exclude people unnecessarily, but that gives us a ground to stand on. It gives us power to say, on Facebook, maybe, what I say to people is, you probably don't think I'm a Christian, but I identify as a Christian, and I don't really think of Jesus as my Lord and Savior, but I'm part of, I guess, like you said, with the Mormon community, I'm part of a Christian community, because that's just what I've been steeped in over time. But I can also say, and here's what's valuable to me, and here's what resonates with me. And I think the more we do that, the more we can awaken other folks about kind of the flaws of fundamentalism, as you were saying as well. So that's my hope, yeah.
I think the dominant religion of our era is science. And it's not considered such because it doesn't impose truths on other people. But in a way, science is how we've built the civilization that we exist in now. And what's always been interesting to me is that there's never been a conflict between Buddhism and science, the way there has been with other religions. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the further science develops, the more it comes into accordance with Buddhism, quantum physics and stuff like that. So, I don't know what I'm saying, but I think...
You're saying well.
The other thing I wanted to say was the history of oppression of queer people in a weird way, demonstrates the truth of our existence, because if we could get rid of our queerness in the face of the burnings and the executions and all that, certainly we would. Who wants to go through all that? But in a way, it just demonstrates the strength of this particular human trait that we all share. And it's another reason why we need the support of our communities.
Thank you for your talk. I'm really enjoying this discussion. And just wanted to lay out a few thoughts, which was, one was that I feel like I have GTSD, God, traumatic stress disorder. I was raised Catholic and by a real hellfire and brimstone mom, and I've done a lot of spiritual exploration throughout my life, Buddhism being a newer one for me, and I'm really loving it. But I just want to acknowledge that, like, I still, as a grown man, with all this new knowledge and science and, you know, logic, when I still have that thought that you're going to hell thought. I still have it. You know, it will never go away. And I have a friend, Louis, who says that he thinks that teaching children, and I guess I'm agreeing, teaching children about hell and the idea of, you know, right and wrong through a Christian or a fundamentalist religious view is child abuse. And I'm starting to really feel that way, because I teach kindergarten, and even with 5-year-olds with different, I have a lot, it's a very multicultural classroom, lots of different religions represented, and the things they say are scary sometimes, you know, what they're being told, what's being preached to them. And so, anyway, I hope we get to a point where that stuff mellows out, and it can be more of a take it to like the rest, starting at birth, you know, like with not having people, like even implanting things like hell and queers, you know, you're going,
And I think, you know, one of the things that, you know, I've sort of heard bits and pieces around about Buddhism is that you can, you know, from a young child, you can teach young children practices rather than kind of indoctrinating them with beliefs that may be too complicated to understand. You know, how does a 5-year-old understand what forever even means, like what eternity means? So burning in hell for eternity, like, can someone even understand that concept? And can anybody understand that concept? But yeah, I mean, I think thinking about how do we raise children to become, you know, fully realized people by giving them tools as they grow up and as they mature.
I appreciated your opening up the category of text to include experience. You know, and I think you know, our meditation today, that is the sacred text to me. When this group convenes and meditates together, I feel like the still place in my mind is connecting with the still place in other people's minds, and that and quite mysterious. I don't really know how that works, but it certainly suggests that we're not alone when it comes to our minds, and that is suggested in many ways. But that to me is the sacred text of Buddhism, is the experience of community meditating together and the kindness and affection we share. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
I wanted to add on to that one, because I was about to make a similar comment about appreciating your expansion of the definition of text. And one of the things that I really have appreciated is ritual or spaces in like going to a cathedral or a mosque. Went to a couple of those in Istanbul that were just magnificent places. And yeah, you do. I mean, I do feel, you know, something greater than myself in that kind of an environment. And you know, that is. But Jim, you're so right. You know, this is a sacred space that we have, and in the sharing of the silence together. It's real valuable. And in the dedication of merit that we do at the end, I mean, that's kind of like, in a sense, a leap of faith, right? We're dedicating, we're asserting that what we're doing here has value that carries beyond this room and this time. And it does for me personally. I can fully subscribe to that.
Does that resonate with lots of other folks? I saw.
Well, I was just thinking over this discussion, hopefully I'm not, by attending this meeting, discriminating against people who aren't gay. Does this group welcome non-gay people? Is this group, what is gay? And is it women? Is it bisexual? Is it transgender? What is fellowship? Does that sound like a masculine word? I mean, I don't know what it is, but hopefully we're not discriminating and excluding people by this label that we are taking upon ourselves here.
It used to be gay Buddhist fraternity, so that was scholarship is better than
Well, I think, and I think that you point out that, you know, as gay people or as LGBT people, we can become a little fundamentalist. I mean, you know, there are folks who are like, well, bisexuals don't belong in queer spaces or that kind of thing. And I think, you know, there may be times when someone might say that, and I think it's important to think about why someone might say that. So, you know, for example, Caro's Lesbian Buddhist Sangha, like that there is value in creating a space that is exclusive to women, for example, and that there's a purpose for that. Around healing, around kind of understanding how dynamics of sexism work. And I think, you know, if we're going to discriminate or we're going to gather around a certain sense of identity or a certain practice, that it may exclude someone, not because there's something wrong with them, but because they don't identify with whatever the purpose is for gathering that day. So I'm trying to think of a silly example. So if we're gathering to have breakfast and I'm not hungry for breakfast, and for me it's lunchtime because I get up at midnight, I'm not going to come to breakfast with you. But that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with me. It just means that I'm not going to come to breakfast. And so if we can have the approach of why are we gathering and why are we coming together and who are we when we come together in this space, my hope is that doesn't exclude people but allows people to self-select what draws them in and what doesn't. But I think it's important to keep asking that question, you know.
I'll just add a historical GBF note about Carol Newhouse in the Lesbian Sangha over in East Bay. I think we put out some feelers some years ago to have some sort of unifying event or group among the two. And Carol went back and talked to the Sangha, and the answer came back, which is, thanks very much, but no. So we're not organizationally discriminating, or anybody can come here.
But I do think there is value in, you know, for gay men, for gay, bi, queer men, to think about what is my angle or what is our angle around Buddhism. You know, do we have a perspective that is different from straight men, for example? And what does that mean, and how do we articulate that? So, what makes you say that?
Well, just because our whole life history is so different. So we bring it to the table when we practice, you know, spiritual practice. You know, the irony is it seems like society at large feels like we're doing us a favor by including us at the table, when really we have so much that society can get from us that, you know, they're doing themselves a favor letting us be at the table. I think the same thing is true with Buddhism. It's kind of like we do have our own perspective that is distinct and unique, and I think it makes Buddhism or any tradition a richer tradition to let us participate at the table. So I'm just saying, yeah, we do have. I do think of. I used to go to the Green Gold Zen Center, and they had. I said this once in one of my talks. They had talk about sexuality in Buddhism, and it all was about kids and families and marriages, which is great for them. but it didn't address me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but my issues as a gay man are very much more addressed in this song than in this wonderful Zen song which I totally respect, but really wasn't attuned to my life experience.
Just have a few minutes left, but
Yeah, we still have some time.
You know, I just want to thank you for your talk. I feel like it took courage to come into this room and sit up there and present it. And I also really appreciated the viewpoints of everybody who also spoke. It was great to hear the back and forth. And it got a little bit uncomfortable. I love it when that happens. I think it's a great thing because it all can't be always kumbaya and the Four Noble Truths. And I'll admit, when I read your bio and I also read your partner's short bio, I thought, oh, cool, I wonder what he's going to talk about. And then you opened up with what you were going to talk about, and I was like, oh my God, I should have stayed home to watch tennis. But I'm glad I stuck it out. And I really appreciate when someone comes in with a different perspective or something that we don't always get to hear, but we do get to question and go back and forth. And my only thing is next time, bring your dad.
he would love it here, yeah. He lives in Texas right now. We'll be here.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Roy said, because I felt like we interrupted your talk 5 minutes into it, you know? But when you opened it up for questions, I thought, I hope he's ready to hang on to the tiger by the tail. But, you know, it's the conversation, that happens in fellowship that is really meaningful for us, and I thank you for facilitating that.
Yeah, let me add my thanks, because it's great to have, you sparked a really good conversation among a whole bunch of us. That's something that doesn't happen every time. Actually happens rarely. We're so much is brought to the table by everybody. So thank you, and thank everybody else for contributing. I think we're just about out of time, and speaking of dedication of merit, I'll have to run over and get it because I don't know. Do you have?
I know it.
You know it by heart? Okay, you will do it then. So thank you, anyway, a couple of things that I'm supposed to do at this point is remind everybody about dana, the Pali word, I believe, is the origin of that, generosity. So we'll have the dana bowl being passed around. We ask that supports your contribution support renting the space, Larkin youth lunches, the correspondence with people behind bars, and so we request that you give at least $10 if you can. And another thing they're supposed to do at this point, which I need to ask for help with, our next week's speaker, because do you know it?
No. I'm sorry. I think it. I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Because it's, I could not locate that. But anyway, show up next week and we'll.
Whoops, this is from August.
I know. That's what I meant. I could not find the latest. But
look at the
anyway. Listen, surprises are always good. It gets us off our dead center. And we also have a host, I hope. Yes.
Hello, everyone. I'm the host today. There's a little bit to eat. Please help yourself. There's warm water. You can make tea. I think most of you know this drill. Just make sure you wash out your cup with soapy warm water and rinse it well. I'll be walking around with the Donna Bowl, as mentioned. And if you want to get on our list, you can sign up. There'll be a sign-up sheet with credentials. And some people meet at around 12:30 at the door and head out to lunch. And so please join. I think that's it.
Any other announcements? Yeah.
I'm your treasurer, and I have our financials for last year, 2014. You can look at that after. I also have from 2013, so you can compare. I was thinking we should do a graph of our Our financial health, yes, which indeed it is.
And learned health. And in 25 words or less, how are we doing?
We have more than $10,000 in the bank. And no debts.
Just a quick note. Today's discussion was so wonderful and it gave us so much wisdom. And this morning when I put on my computer, it popped up that today is Buddha Enlightenment Day. Go through the day with that knowledge.
Okay, no more announcements. Then time for our dedication of prayers. I will be in my house. From memory.
By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without suffering. And may all live in equanimity without too much aversion or too much attachment, believing in the equality of all that live.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.